Okay, everybody can see this? Okay, we're good to go. Okay, well, hey, like Heather said, she and I have chatted a little bit about, what are some topics that would be relevant or some topics that maybe would lead to a tool that people could use. I know there's varying levels of expertise and experience in any of the subjects we bring up. So we always like to start at the very beginning. And one of the things that came up a number of times is popular topics, both when we were at SCA and just in conversation is when we talk about CPG and grocery, what's the true cost of that? What are all the factors that go into consideration when you're thinking about how profitable will my product be in grocery? And as I'm looking at different options, uh, and all the different factors that go into it, what's going to move the needle, what's not going to move the needle, and how do I make sure that I don't forget something? So that's what we're going to focus on today. Let me give you just a quick little brief overview of me. Hi, I'm Kevin. I've worked in F&B in some capacity for over 25 years. I started, as many folks do that end up in coffee or are in coffee, started out on the food side. I was a chef for a number of years here in the Twin Cities. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was worked in restaurants for the first third of my career. Then I moved over to Broadline Food Service Distribution, both locally here in the Twin Cities, and then with the corporate U.S. Foods team in Rosemont, Illinois, for a number of years, working with one of our partners, Premier, which is a group purchasing organization. So I won't get into the details of that, but it's just contracted selling on a particular program for particular classes of trade. So a lot of sales and business development. I had a team there. Later moved over to a partner of Premier's called Team 4 Value 4, where I built their sales department there. Then I had one of my old contacts at US Foods, who was a friend of mine, say, "Hey, you wanna come run my company?" To which I said, "No, I don't. I love doing the sales thing." But long story short, came back and ran Spy House Coffee in 2019. I believe I started there. Worked our way through COVID. Everybody's got a COVID story. We can talk about that over cocktails sometime. And then I've was part of the team that helped with the acquisition of Fairwave Coffee Collective out of Kansas City, purchased Spy House as the first out-of-market acquisition for Fairwave. And we purchased then Up Coffee Roasters, which was a roaster and a distributor in the Twin Cities as well. And Folly Coffee, Filterra Coffee became part of my market. And then I exited that last year and then been hanging out with people like Heather and other fun, cool people, sharing what I know and helping where I can. So that's me. Um, okay, so CPG and grocery. Man, there's so much we can talk about with this. There's from how to do it to what's the best path for the product that I have. I mean, every one of these bullet points here could be its own week-long webinar series. But we're going to focus today is really just on costs, right? We're just focusing on identifying and laying out the costs along the path to getting on shelf in grocery. Or if you're on shelf in grocery, what are all the things you need to consider? And what happens to that fantastic D2C margin that we saw, and why are we making so little once we're on the shelf in grocery? So I think it's helpful. This is all really leading up to a tool that I'll show you at the end that we'll share with everybody. It's a really basic and straightforward way to plan the route to grocery from a cost standpoint, and lets you look at the whole process for each of your products, so that as you make changes, it's a good touch point to go back and say, well, if we're going to go from DSD shipping to a distributor, what do we think the net effect is going to be on our bottom line? So we'll start with some basic costs. We'll talk a little bit about shipping and freight. We'll talk a little bit about labor. We'll look at margin versus markup. It's a drum that I'm going to beat till the end of time. We confuse those terms and conflate those terms frequently, not just here, but everywhere in life. So it's important that we, lay down some fundamentals about what's the difference between the two of those. Then we're going to take a look at the trade spend deductions, promotional charges, off invoice chargebacks, all the fun stuff that if you haven't done this before, all of a sudden you get hit with that and you wonder, why am I doing this in the first place? Because you didn't see any of this coming. So we want to at least identify that it's out there. put a number to it and make it part of the plan. Then I'm going to jump over to a forecasting and cost analysis tool. I just call it a retail grocery calculator. That is a way that when I was launching Spy House into CPG, and we were growing, and we got into Target, and then we got into Walmart, and how do we do this, and how do I make sure I don't make a move that is going to cost us money rather than save us money? For somebody that used to work in kitchens a lot, somehow I got to be kind of an Excel nerd. And so I put a tool together and refined a tool actually that I got somewhere else, and retooled it so that it helps to calculate this stuff. And then we'll do some questions and answers at the end if you have any questions. Otherwise, we can just chat too, see what you all are up to. So, okay. Let's start with the basics here. It's almost not worth mentioning some of the basic costs, but every time I think, yeah, people know that, I run into somebody that says, oh, I never really thought about that piece. And I just kind of put this overall value on my master case cost, and that's when you start to kind of get off the rails. So let's start at the very beginning. When you start figuring out what it's going to look like on shelf, or how you're going to get to a retail price, you obviously need to know your costs, right? So that includes all the consumable costs of goods. So that's things like all the obvious things. And we're really talking about, the example I'm going to use today is whole bean coffee, because it's kind of the thing that everybody knows. But obviously this is for anything from, I mean, this could be used for any CPG product, any CPG food product, beverages, frozen dinners if you wanted to. But so you have to obviously know the cost of your consumable ingredients, everything that's going into your product or your drink. You have to know the cost of your packaging. Don't forget things when you're talking about packaging that start to get nickel and dimey, but as you grow, those nickels and dimes add up to dollars. So, can wraps and labels and lids and stickers, little things like, it came across when we were working with Spy House that they initially weren't calculating the costs of the little acetate sticker that helps to fold over the top of a 5-pound bag. And I'm like, well, we pay for that. We need to charge for that too. So, and then case packaging. So if you're selling by the each, that's not an issue. Like if you had an RTD drink that, yes, you pack it into a case, but you're going to actually retail it by the each, then the case packaging is not a thing. But most of the time, if you have, a six pack or 4-pack of an RTD drink, or if in our example for the bags, there isn't case packaging, but there is, master case packaging. So that comes under the list of the cost of goods with shipping, right? So if you're shipping something out, you've got boxes that you got to buy in bulk. It's got to be part of your cost. And sometimes folks forget about that. Labels, all the shipping labels, things that the consumer never sees, but you pay for in order for the consumer to actually get your product through a retailer. Add everything up. This is just kind of a walkthrough. That's where it becomes helpful to, if you're I found it really helpful to be part of the roasting process when I was running the company. Like, I'm not a roaster, and I'm the worst barista you'll ever meet. But I did all of that at different points just so I could kind of understand workflow and products being used, and just a better understanding. So tape and glue and boring things like that, but you have to know. And then shipping costs, which is going to be really our first topic here. Like how much does it cost to get a case to a specific place, right? So let's talk a few minutes to talk a little bit about shipping, and just really define some terms. When you talk about shipping and you're shipping to a retailer or a distributor, you're really going to talk about FOB or landed costs, right? So FOB or freight on board, sometimes it's called free on board. I don't really understand that, but it's the sell price that does not include the shipping or shipping related costs. And that usually means if you're quoting somebody FOB pricing, you, the seller, are going to pay for the shipping related costs. So obviously you want to know what those are, because they're not going to be actually on the invoice. It's going to be something that you're taking care of one way or another. Landed costs is the sell price of the product plus most of the shipping related costs. And most of the time you need to lay out, well, what's included in my landed pricing. Shipping, maybe insurance, maybe some fees. If there's a third-party warehouse involved, those fees need to be included in that landed cost. you built into the quoted sell price, and the buyer pays for these costs because that's the cost that they're actually they're buying everything, right? The shipping and the product. So if you haven't done this before, make sure that you know what price you're quoting out to retailers. Okay. This, I'm going to go on a quick tangent here on calculating and estimating shipping costs, because it's one of those things, especially recently in the past 3 or 4 years, is just crazy, right? Post-pandemic, it was insane. During the pandemic, it was not even comprehensible what this would cost. And so there's been fluctuations. And so I just wanted to give an example of something that I put together before when I was trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I build this in a way where every single time I ship a product, whether it's D2C or if I'm shipping to a retailer or a distributor, I kind of wanted to know my average costs, right? Like I wanted to know about how much it was going to cost, so that as I was calculating and forecasting, I could figure that out. This is so I had a client that had a third-party warehouse, had ShipBob out in New Jersey, and they were not calculating shipping costs, and then they were also wondering why they weren't making a whole lot of money. So I put this together as a way to say, okay, well, they had 3 products. The D2C, or direct to consumer, we could sell by the each, right? So I needed to know how much does that cost for each one of these zones. And then what about the case size? How much does that cost for each one of these zones? That would be my retailer or distributor shipping costs. And so what I did is I just took a straight average right across all the zones and came up with like, well, this is about the average cost to ship D2C. This is what the average cost would be to ship to a retailer or distributor. Now, you can do it, and by figuring that out, it helped to inform our strategy, right? It helped us say, look, if we're in New Jersey right now and we're trying to grow the brand, it doesn't make sense to do a whole lot really at all, west of the Mississippi. So what I want to know, what does it cost to ship the stuff in Manhattan or New York, Boston, that kind of area? Chicago, Minneapolis markets is as far as west as we want to go. And then if we had something in the rest of the country, how would we quote pricing on the product? And that was really our 3 layers or 3 levels that we would do. You can do, once you have business in different areas geographically, you can do what's called a weighted average. So how much you're selling in each area would dictate what like if most of it was in New York City, my weighted average would be much lower than if all of a sudden I had a big explosion of business, let's say in Chicago or maybe in LA. Nothing we needed to really worry about at early stage, but it's a good idea to understand where these costs are going to be. The case price is the case price. You want to know your breaks, and you want to know what shipping is going to cost, so that as you add more to it, it's going to be a lot. As you add more cases to an order, obviously the price is going to come down. So you want to know where those price breaks are going to be. I wanted to know what the price break would be where basically I would say I would pick up shipping, right? So initially it was we were quoting FOB I'm sorry, landed pricing, and then the price break would happen at, I think we decided it was going to be 4 cases, and that would be our you told the idea, is that going to be a minimum order? How are we going to do that? But knowing shipping is a big deal because it fluctuates. So keep track of it. I mean, if you haven't worked with this before, an example that I wrote down is, when Spy House locally, when we were doing D2C, and we would just, if you were a customer, you pay for shipping. Locally, it's $5 or $6 to ship at that point. At that point, it was a 10-ounce bag of coffee. When I got quoted pricing, we had to get pricing from Minneapolis to Chicago for a 3PL, or third-party logistics company, and it had to be pallet pricing, so we could get it to a consolidator for our Walmart business. For a pallet, which is 100 cases, six bags to a case, it was $126, right? So the difference between shipping a bag locally was $6. I could ship it Chicago for 21 cents. So obviously, knowing that and isolating that shipping cost is going to be really, really important. So, okay. So we talked a little bit, and also, I'm sorry, let's go back for a second. I when we're going to talk about labor next, but I don't include shipping, even if I'm doing the shipping, even if I have my team doing DSD delivery, I don't include shipping labor as part of labor. And the reason is that later, as I adjust and I want to figure out third-party shipping, right? Or I don't want to do it anymore. I'm going to have a local or regional distributor do my DSD shipping for me. I want to be able to take that particular cost and not have to like pull it out of the rest of my labor cost. It's its own thing. I just happen to be doing it, right? Or my teams happen to be doing it, but there's still a cost associated with it. So you want to make sure that I would highly recommend keeping those separate, even from the beginning. It's just going to be a lot easier for calculations later on, right? Okay. Speaking of labor, all right. So we're going to look at labor costs on the tool because obviously, it's a cost of goods after you get past all the initial costs to produce the product. And I look at this, I always broke it down into direct and indirect labor because there's a bunch of stuff that folks forget to count as a cost because it's not directly related to producing the product, and that's the indirect labor. So let's talk about this for a second. So direct is really two ways to calculate that. I always call them theoretical and actual, right? So my theoretical is, okay, what's my hourly rate of labor and the total number of hours it takes to assemble one piece of something, like one bag of coffee. And you can do that by working in the department. You can ask somebody to, just do some time checks on like, one batch of, if we had a 35 kilo luring and one batch comes out, how many bags are made and how long does it take from when the green goes in to when the bag is in a master case ready to be shipped? If they were going to do that as a continual process, how long does it take? And that's going to be my labor dollars per unit. Another way to do it is to take a specific period of time. Maybe it's a pay period, right? Maybe it's a month, and say, what did I spend on labor total? Right? So don't forget about benefits. Don't forget about some of the other things that are thrown as part of labor. And how many units did we produce during that time? What are our total POs for that time that were actually shipped? And that's a different number. Okay. I like looking at that once in a while because the delta between those two opens up a whole nother conversation about, and we're not gonna get into it, but you can ask questions like, okay, well, if they're producing this much in an hour, but I'm actually, my actual is one number, my theoretical is another number, what's happening in that time in between? And sometimes it's not easily identifiable, but it's a good idea to kind of, I call it auditing your labor to figure out what's going on. Like, we should be able to produce X amount of time. If we can't, there's maybe very good reasons why we're not, and that becomes more of an operations question and an operations challenge. But anyway, theoretical and actual and direct. Indirect, often referred to as if you look at accounting best practices, SG&A, selling general administrative costs, the costs that you incur that are not directly related to your product. So, like rent and utilities, and maybe there's a sales commission in there, although I do pull that out into like a different column. But general marketing, heck, office supplies, just things that you pay for, you have to figure those into costs. And if you don't, oftentimes that's a gap and you're wondering, well, I should be making 10% on this, but I'm actually only making 7. I can't figure out that 3%. Let me give you an example. All right. So if you're going to, if it takes 1 hour to roast, bag, label, and case pack one roasted batch, right? And your average labor is $22 an hour. Just making up numbers, by the way. We don't want to get into the labor conversation about how much we're paying folks. Bags produced. Let's say you get 60 12-ounce bags out of that 1 hour's worth of work. Each bag then is 37 bucks, right? Or I'm sorry, 37 cents. Let's say to figure out your indirect costs, let's say you've got $2,000 that you're paying for all that stuff I mentioned before. It's rent, utilities, and some office supplies, and you bought a printer. Well, that's a different expense, but you have these expenses. Every month it adds to about $2,000. It's 20 days. Let's say you roast Monday through Friday, and it's 8 hours per day, and you get 60 bags per hour. That means that your indirect costs are 21 cents a bag, right? So your total labor costs, and again, The reason indirect, even though it's not like office supplies aren't labor, early on, again, good accounting principles would say put your indirect costs in with your labor costs. You can pull them apart later on. You can pull them apart later on. But right now, it's just what does it cost? What are all the things you're paying for to get to that final bag? And that would include your indirect costs. And so in this example, the total labor per bag is 58 cents a bag. Okay. Just again, just a very simple. I know it gets there's other things involved with this, but it's a good place to start with how you calculate and track your labor costs. Okay. All right. So this is the drum that I keep beating all the time. And I would say most of the time, folks, especially in startup mode, confuse the terms margin and markup all the time. And it drives me crazy because you end up signing agreements with folks when you're talking about markup or you're talking about margin and you're thinking markup. And it gets really not to your advantage to confuse these terms. So I just wanted to level set on baseline financials, right? So very simply, margin or gross profit is the calculation is revenue minus cost of goods divided by revenue. That focuses on the cost. That tells me what am I making from this product, right? Markup informs margin. So if I want to make 40% and I have cost of goods that are, a certain dollar amount, what do I need to mark them up? And the way you calculate that is revenue minus your cost of goods divided by cost of goods. It focuses on your pricing. Pricing informs cost, or pricing informs your profitability. So you can know either one of them to get the other one, but usually I think of this as margin is informed by your markup. And then contribution is a term that doesn't get used enough because we talk about percentages all the time. And we say, oh, I grew my business by 100% year over year. And then I say, well, that's fantastic. That sounds like you had a great year. Like, yeah, I sold one bag last year, and this year I sold two. So contribution on that is nothing, right? I mean, that we get lost in percentages. I always say I get paid by dollars and I get paid in dollars, not by percentages. So understanding what that margin is when it actually is a dollar amount is super important. And quite frankly, where we should end most conversations. So, okay. Here we go. All right. So, whoops. Quick example of that, $16 bag, your COGS are almost $5. Your margin on that is going to be 69%. Your contribution, the dollar amount of that is 11 bucks. Okay, the markup to get to 69%, I have to mark that up 220%, which is just 16 divided by 499, again, divided by 499. Okay. And a quick note on if you're getting into grocery and you're wondering kind of where should I be situated as far as pricing goes, and we'll get more into detail on this in a second. But the idea is that your wholesale margin into grocery, if you have a D2C price, should be about 50 to 70% of your D2C price. So if I'm selling the $16 bag to a retailer, or that's my manufacturer suggested retail price, it's probably my source closer to like 21 bucks. Your D2C or in cafe pricing is always going to be higher than your retail pricing. Okay, it's the most profitable, but it's the hardest. This is the hardest piece to grow. Okay, so as we dive in just a little bit further, margins on average. I'm just giving you some average margins. So as we calculate this in a second, we go to the sheet. I'm thinking, most distributors retail wise, aside from chargebacks and off invoice stuff, is about 22 to 27%, depending upon the distributor. So we're using 25% today. A retailer is going to want to see about 40%. I think that's getting to be more and more conservative. I know plenty that are at 50% as far as what their retailers want to see. So, but we're using 40% today for our calculations. So obviously, if you haven't done this before, you can see where those massive D2C or in-cafe margins evaporate just by going through the route or the path to the grocery store. Okay. Okay. We could do a weekend on trade spend, right? This is kind of the secret piece that if you're new to this and you haven't done this before, where you start to get stuck in a few different places. So trade spend is everything really that expenses you incur either through your retailer or distributor, or that AR AP relationship, or things that they charge you for, or costs that you incur to market your product and increase your brand awareness, and which leads to brand desire. Things you spend to get it, once it's on shelf, off of shelf, right? So a combination of those two things are going to be anywhere from 5% of revenue to up to 25% of revenue. It so depends upon current brand awareness, how far or how long you've been in grocery. Are you a known brand? Are you an unknown brand? Are you going through distribution? Are you going direct to retail? There's a lot in there, and I just wanted to point out some of the more common things that you're going to get charged for you may not know about at the front here. So off invoice discounts are given to distributors, and often, but not always, passed to the retailers for a specific time period, usually for an entire month, or for maybe it's a 2-week period. They incentivize distributors to carry higher volume. Another thing to worry about with off invoice discounts that you offer is that they obviously never want to be out of stock. So, and if they can get more at a lower price, they're going to do so. But then you're going to get some things returned. So be careful and know your volume that's going through and your forecast, so that you don't over promote or over discount for product that you're just going to get you're going to have to trash anyway. So manufacturer chargebacks or promotional placement or everyday low price or EDLP allowance allows a brand to provide a retailer this discount, and then that gets by the distributor, and then that just simply gets passed along, right? So you get charged back on that on the invoice that you get paid from the distributor. Scanbacks or rebates, I love these because it's the most transparent way to actually offer promotional things, and that was where you get charged back for rebates based on what people actually purchased. So whatever they scanned at the checkout, that's what you get. They get the sale price, the consumer gets the sale price, and the retailer and the distributor aren't able to stockpile your product at a lower price because they're not buying it at a lower price. They're only charging back for the things that were actually purchased. No surprise, most retailers don't like that, don't like to do it this way. And on-shelf marketing. So shelf tags or shelf talkers, coupons, on-shelf displays. These are things that you want to invest in to get that initial or trial purchase that that gets the product off a shelf and into somebody's cart for the first time. Some retailers love them and want to help you with them, and some of them say can't do it. It's not part of what they do for their brand. So worth asking about those. Other trade spend, slotting fees. If you work with distributors, you're probably familiar with these. They'll bill directly to you. It's the cost of doing business with many distributors and retailers. It's not negotiable most of the time, especially for emerging brands. It could be a flat fee, like just a slotting fee, or anywhere from like 50 to 100% discount per SKU per store to just get it on shelf. I know that like Giant in Philly will say, okay, great, we'll bring you in, but your first 3 cases for each SKU have to be free. What's interesting about that is that they're not going to tell you that, but you can negotiate that down. You usually get to about a case rather than 3. So it is a cost of doing business, but the degree to which you actually have to pay is usually negotiable, usually. Returns and discounts, that's pretty self-explanatory. It protects everybody from out-of-date product. Or if you had a sale or somebody bought a large, the distributor bought a large stock on promotion and it didn't sell. What you got to watch out for these is understand on the front end, are you going to get charged for them to ship it back to you or for them to destroy it? They might say, it's going to be, $5 a case to ship back to you, or it's going to be $5 a case to destroy it, one way or the other. You want to know that ahead of time. And fair share deductions. Some retailers will, when they have resets on the categories, they don't reset them themselves. They have a merchandising company do it. Oftentimes, that's a function of their large partners. Like here in the Twin Cities, at a regional chain called Lunds and Byerly's. There's 20 of them. Caribou Coffee is partnered with Lunds and Byerly's as their merchandiser. So I mean, it's weird, right? Because like you're a competitor, but they were my competitor, but they were kind of. they were deciding what the set really looks like. They help with planograms, and then they charge Lunds and Byerly's for that, and Lunds and Byerly's then would charge back for like, well, we had a reset fee. One of your competitors did it for you. Just it's another question to ask retailers. Am I going to get charged every time you do a reset, or is it your team that's actually doing it? Okay. And this is just drives the point home even more because again, distributors especially, chargebacks and deductions, these sorts of things we're talking about are how they monetize the relationship. Unfortunately, now they're getting away from it. Like UNFI, as many of you have heard, it's changing their whole model and charging percentages or percentage of sales as instead of some of these chargebacks and stocking fees and slotting fees and things like that. But just I guess the point of this is to point out that it's a real thing. Some of them you have to fight to claw back some of that money you're owed. Some of them it's not really worth it. And to know which one is which, you want to have those conversations at the front end with distributors and retailers, right? So, what promotions do I have to participate in? What's your published ad pricing? Is there a trade show as a distributor that I'm required to once every other year to participate in your trade show? Is there a free fill? What is it? How many cases? How many dollars? Tell me about your thing when things are spoiled or out of date. What's the process with that and the fees associated with that? Do you put entire categories on temporary price reductions that then you just bill back to me? How frequently do you do it and how much is it? And there's more. So they're unavoidable, I guess, is the bottom line. It's going to happen. So you want to make sure that you understand how much and when. Okay. All right. Let's go to the grocery calculator real quick here. I'm going here. Okay. So this is the tool that I put together that again, I think it's effective. It's been helpful for me so that I understand when I start pulling these different levers that we just talked about, how is it going to affect my bottom line? So let's run through this really quick, and then I'll take questions, and we can play around with this a little bit. By the by, this is what we'll be sending to you so that you can take a look at it, and hopefully it's useful for you as well. But it works like this. So we have this our blend, our BBC blend. It's a whole bean coffee. Here's the SKU. We have 12-ounce bags, and there's 6 units per case, right? So that's the pack size that we're shipping and selling to retailers. Obviously, we're not selling a case to customers. This is just the calculations are all based on this case size because that's what we're selling, right? All right, so ingredient costs, consumer packaging costs, outer or shipping packaging costs, shipping and labor, each one of their own costs because each one of these can change at any given time. And I've noted what the individual bag costs are up here, but down here they're costs by the case, right? Outer packaging, well, it's one, doesn't matter. It's just the cost of that cardboard box and the label and the tape that I use on the box is, let's say it's 75 cents. All right. So my cost of goods for this one is for this case is $29.91, right? And so for each bag, what's the sum of each bag? It's going to be $5.61, right? That's my COGS for this one. So I want to do some calculations and figure out, okay, what should be my price to retailers, right? Or if I'm shipping directly to retail, what do I want my margin to be? Okay, so I'm shipping direct to retail because they're going to want to mark it up to, by the by, a good place to figure out if these calculations are going to make sense for your market is to get into the stores, right? The most valuable lessons I learned in CPG were when during COVID, one of our COVID stories is I did most of the DSD deliveries to Target. So I was in Targets every day and I looked at how our product looked on shelf. How's everybody else doing? What's their pricing at? Who's full? Who's not full? Who can I learn is going through distribution? Who's doing direct store delivery? The price points. Did they move my product? Am I now kind of behind a pole that's in the middle of the aisle? Or like all these things are super important. And I figured out by actually getting into the store. And so I also was able to see this is my margin. I'm sorry, this is my price, my manufacturer, my MSRP. And is it competitive where I want it to be competitive? Is it with the other specialty coffee brands that are local? Is it more? Obviously, it's going to be more than Starbucks and Caribou on shelf. It was more than Peace Coffee on shelf, which is fine. It was on par kind of with Stumptown, which is national at that point, and a couple other. So all the stuff figured out. So what these cells do here is in this targeted direct margin, this is I want to make 45% if I sell it to the store. So what is that going to be? Let's say I wanted to make 50%. I could change that to 50. It's going to change what my direct price should be. So if I want to make 50% over here in this column, it's going to tell me, well, I need to charge 59.82 to make that 50%. So I would change this. Let's call that 60 then. Okay. So now that the actual margin I'm making is now 50, a little over 50%. But I'm gonna return that back to I forget what I had, 45. All right, 54.38. I'm gonna call it my direct price is 55. And again, I'm including things like shipping, and this is expensive. I'm saying I got to pay somebody to run it in. It's going to cost me $1 a bag. Do the calculations to figure out what your actual labor is. This can change, and that would change all these calculations then, right? But anyway, putting the number in the colored cells is going to give you the white cells where what the numbers actually should be. So 45 up here is going to give you, okay, that should make 45%. I should charge 54.38. I'm charging 55. It gets me 55.62. Okay, great. Price into distribution. Well, now distributors got to take about 25% of their margin, right? Okay, so that means that $55 actually becomes $41.25. Okay, so that, because again, I got to pay my distributor. So I know that if I'm going into distribution, my offered price to them for the case is going to be, maybe I might do 42.50. Maybe I'll do 40 if I really want that distributor to reach some retailers. My retail strategy informs which distributor partners I'm going to use, not the other way around. So maybe I need them, maybe I don't. But that gives me an idea of how I stay profitable and by charging my distributor the right price. Trade spend, again, could be 5. If it's 5%, that means each case I got to allocate and think about $2.75. One way or another, I'm going to get charged that. So you might as well, you have to plan for this. I think 12% is a good place to be. It covers all of those chargebacks off invoices. If you don't get those, great. That just goes to the bottom line. But plan on the fact that about 12% is going to have to go through either a chargeback of some sort, or maybe I have a coupon, or my limited time offers, whatever it is, right? And then broker. Didn't get far into brokers, but if you don't have a sales team and you pull up a broker, usually they charge about 5%. Maybe you pay a sales commission to somebody on your team. Maybe it's 3%, but whatever it is, the cost of sales has got to be accounted for somewhere. Okay. And then it's going to show you two things. It's going to show you directly my net revenue on that, what was it, a $55 case is going to be $16. So just about 30%. Through distribution, it's going to be $2.68 on what I had, which was $41 in there. So that takes out all of these costs, including your COGS, your labor. It takes out trade spend, the sales fee, everything's out, and you're left with $2.68. So you can see, and if you're doing this, you already know this, right? But if you haven't done this before, every time you add a partner, and as you get bigger, you're going to have to add partners. You have to keep track of how much money you have left after you pay everybody. Okay, so I want to say again, my manufacturer suggested retail price now is at the each is $16 for that bag, right? So if that retailer says they want to make about 40%, then that 40% is going to be $15.28. Okay, so there's a little bit of room in there. Maybe I want to change that. You have the information at this point to understand, okay, if they want to make this much, maybe my case price into retail can be a little bit higher. They're still going to make their margin, and I can take the difference between $15.28 and $16, and I can keep that. So again, it just lets you know, as long as you have an understanding, a lot of retailers will share it with you, or you can find out from third-party sources, what do they need to see? I know that, if this is going to be in Whole Foods, it'd need to be 50%. So I'd actually need to be at $18 on shelf. Well, shoot. Okay, my MSRP then, I'd have to change that and say, say it's 1850, or or maybe 1849, whatever. So that's going to be a little over 50%. So anyway, change it back to 40 just to keep the sheet clean. All right, so that's the calculation there. Then I'm going to just look at the number of doors I'm going to go into. Let's say I'm going to get, in order to make something, how much am I going to make? If I'm going to get 25 locations and I'm moving this SKU on average 1.3 per week, okay? That means it's, 32 units per week across all 25 stores, right? 1,600 per year. That means my gross revenue direct is going to be $92,000. My net on that, again, on that 30%, I'll make 27,000 on that. Into distribution, the gross revenue is $69,000. Now that I'm going to make 4,500 bucks. Okay. Look, the point of this, the point of the real value of this is really to see how these adjustments on each one of the factors of the cost of going into retail, from trade spend to my labor to shipping to which distributor I use, to which retailer this is going into. You can manipulate these individual pieces and see how it actually affects your bottom line. It helps you understand, can I afford to do this? Is there money, like we saw back over here? Is there money I'm leaving on the table? What about that 72 cents? Is it a good retail partner? I'm gonna just say leave it with them, or like, I don't know, I think they're gonna stick me with a lot more chargeback, so I want to make as much as I can on the front end. Maybe you change that. Maybe you change your price into that retailer, right? And by how much? So, okay, we're pushing up against it, and actually I'm over because that's just what I do. But I'll take a beat here and see, does anybody have any questions? Does this make sense? And for folks that have been doing this for a while, what did I miss? Because there's always something, right? There's much more that goes into this on a nuanced level, but I think those categories cover the things you really need to worry about.
Kevin, I know that this could also be a whole separate webinar, but one time I got into a brand and rolled up my sleeves on our pricing into grocery, and we were upside down in our cost because the team had not considered a lot of these factors. Do you have any advice for folks after they use your tool if they realize they're either not making their margin goals or they're actually going backwards in their, take home? Do you have any advice for them on that?
I go back through all of these. I mean, if you find yourself upside down, I first just look at basically I'd start with what your direct price, right? So if you're upside down, is it because you're not charging enough, which happens frequently? That would cover some of, you have to have an idea of, like, I want to make a certain percentage. I want to make a certain number of dollars per case on this, right? Or a certain percent. Start with this percentage. And then, there's only two major levers you can pull. You can charge more, bring in more revenue, or you can control your costs, right? So you go back over here and say, okay, how are we doing this? Is there any cost savings I have on the production side? Most of the time that'd be a harder row to hoe. I would say if you're upside down, it probably has to do with your price, or looking at some of your partnerships. Like, do you have a broker? We had a broker that initially got us into Walmart that was charging 10%, which was egregious, but it was because we were kind of a beta test and there's not a whole lot I could do about it. But I knew it, right? So if I know that it's 10% and it should be 5%, I can take a look and figure out where I need to make that up. Maybe I need to raise my pricing by half that, 2.5% to make up. It could be little bits and pieces in each one of these categories as well. But know what your goal needs to be. Your goal obviously is not to break even. You have to make money on this. So I'd also dig back into trade spend. I'm assuming that if you're upside down and everything else is lining up, what you're not accounting for is trade spend. So go back and see. I had an invoice that went into Walmart through the broker that was a $25,000 invoice, and I got paid $9,000. So you better believe I went through that with a fine tooth comb and pulled back some sloppy invoicing on their part, where they didn't provide me with the actual PO or the received PO from Walmart. So I'm like, if you can't prove you sold it, then you can't charge me for it. So you have to kind of figure out, I guess, where's the bleed? Where's the bleed?
So you
Where,
said you had a $25,000 invoice and you got paid $9 after all of
no,
the
I'm sorry, $9,000.
9,000. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, not nine. If it was $9, it would have been a bigger scream. You all would have heard that. So, but even 9,000 was crazy. And some of it you just can't fight. I mean, you have to understand the cost of doing business with distribution sometimes is chargebacks are going to take money, and that's just how they work. Well, and to find that 1.5% spoilage fee, you want to push back on it, you can, but what's it going to get you at the end of the day? Is it going to work, or is it going to be something where basically you might carve back a half percentage of that, and then you've kind of soured that relationship a little bit? So can't make that decision for you, but things to consider.
Jonathan, do you want to ask your question or do you want me to read it? It's up to you.
Yeah. So I'm kind of new to the grocery side.
Yeah.
Just a lot of wholesale stuff, and I'm with a new company, and they got a little bit of grocery going on. And the trouble that I'm kind of having with some of this is like the aftermath of it. So this like trade spend aspect of it.
Yep.
Like, who's really managing that part of it? And
Mhm.
then, like the additional labor, it seems like a lot of work
It is.
to manage
It is.
that. And it's like, is it the sales guy's gig? Is that our logistics? Is that purchasing? Like, I'm just trying to figure out, who should be taking care of that.
It's a great question. Do you have, so do you, are those CPG relationships through a broker? Or is this all, do you have a broker, or is it just your own sales team?
So
Kevin, I can chime in on that one too. I've had this
Yeah.
recent experience a couple times lately.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the trade spend percentage and the actual budget should be owned by the sales team. Like that's part of their metrics and what they're responsible for. I think what gets really difficult is the paperwork and the chargeback. So I started my career at PepsiCo, and when I worked on the Frito-Lay side as an account manager, I was responsible for the percentage, but never once did I look at a chargeback, look at any of that. Like I never had to look at it.
Yep.
When I worked at Vive Organic, our accounting team took care of that. So that was really great. And what we were responsible from the sales team perspective is our calendars needed to be up to date. So if they pulled a UNFI chargeback, they would go look and say, okay, Whole Foods is supposed to be on sale, check the mark. And then in the current company I'm working with now, we actually because I was really struggling with this, Jonathan, like I was getting so frustrated. I'm like, as a sales leader, I don't have time to read these invoices.
Yep.
So we actually hired a third party. There's a few out there that are pretty good. I've vetted several of them. So if you do have any questions, you can reach out, but they're a little costly, but I think from most of the ones I've talked to, they end up saving you money because you get charged for the wrong things. So from a salesperson perspective, we own the budget, but someone else needs to be reviewing those chargebacks. It's not value added to your sales team.
Right.
But you need someone, or you end up, there's a company that I worked in between, that is no longer in business. And similar to Heather's story, like we went back and they weren't even sending in invoices. Like it was just a complete disaster. So get a handle on it now before it gets out of control, because it's
Yep.
super complex.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that's
some
really-
some of the third party, thank you, Kayleen. That's super helpful.
You're welcome.
Some of the third parties will actually will depending if they might do an audit, and they'll say, what will work for you as a percentage of what they can recapture. So sometimes they just take a cut of what they can pull back on chargebacks. I was asking about the brokers simply because if depending upon your sales strategy, if you have a sales team or if it's a little bit of sales, but you work with a broker, brokers will often offer that service as well. Brokers or should be offering that service since they're managing that account for you. But the overall umbrella of sales, to Kayleen's point, when you're starting out, sales should have somewhat of a handle on that. If you do have somebody on the finance team that's just AR AP, that could certainly land in their box as well, but they're going to have to coordinate with sales anyway to understand a lot of those details that Kelina just outlined. So yeah, it's a perpetual headache. Understanding it and then doing something about it are two different things, right?
Yeah,
Some of them are worth fighting, and some of them are just like, yeah, it was in the budget. It's not worth chasing a half a point or even a point sometimes if it's going to take you a couple hours to do it.
no, that's really helpful. We have asked like which categories I was in. So we do some that's direct to the smaller chains that are we're in Nashville.
Yeah.
So we do some directly, and then
Yeah.
we do some through distribution company. So both of it's smaller volumes. I mean, they're it's a couple pallets a month.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, I'm looking at growing that aspect of it and just trying to factor that portion of that that after management labor.
Mhm.
Does that is that part of the equation? Then when we consider labor, and then you've separated shipping as well. So I'm thinking, okay, so do I have another category of like account management labor? But as Kaylin said, or Kaylina, sorry, it said if it's part of the sales team, then I guess that's just part of that cost.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out what to
Yeah,
do with that.
it's start by I think a great place to start is just understanding the current rather than understanding the category as a whole, understand how it relates to your current relationships. So, I'm a big believer in asking a lot of questions in customer business reviews. And if you don't have customer business reviews with your retailers, you should certainly set them up with your buyers. But going back and having that as a topic and saying, help me understand. Not that we're not here to fight about it. I'm just here. I need to understand how this works. Like, and give specific examples, bring some invoices in. Like, what is this? Have them explain it to you in their terms. And then that would show you what, some of them are going to be like, nothing we can do. And some of them are like, oh yeah, well, you should have gotten documentation with that, or we could provide that if it's really important for you. So ask the questions. Understanding is really the key in that.
We only have about 4 more minutes. Who else has questions for Kevin when it comes to this grocery stuff? One thing we didn't really get into is the cost of doing business with independent grocers versus the cost of doing business with like national grocers. And in my experience, I have found that it's slightly less expensive to work with those independent grocers. But also you're not reaching as many customers or as many, as much geography as you would otherwise. Do you want to speak to that, Kevin?
Yeah. It's almost an extension of the example of like your most profitable business is always going to be D2C, right? Set up your Shopify store. If you have cafes, again, I'm just leaning into whole bean coffee here, but if you have, a D2C business, your margins there are always going to be terrific. The problem is that you're one dot in a giant white snowstorm of noise out there, right? So anybody that's buying D2C, geographies can be irrelevant. I could buy coffee from upstate New York, or I could buy it from San Diego, and everywhere in between. It doesn't matter. So to try to get your brand noticed, and that is really, really hard. You actually have to, if you want more volume there, you actually have to increase your trade spend D2C like astronomically, so that search engine optimization and all these other online metrics become super important. Independent retailers are a lot like that. So you can reach their audience. Oftentimes they're on shelf, especially we were on shelf in co-ops at a higher price point than we were obviously at Target. So one Lake Winds co-op for me was the equivalent revenue wise from 6 Targets. So, but I only knew that because I could look at this breakdown and say, okay, well, what's my actual volume? What am I spending at each one of these partners? I think, Heather, there's not much I could add to what you just said. Is like usually the smaller independent retailers, anywhere from 1 to 10 stores, is great. And it helps. I always look at that as that's where I test things. That's where I'm like, okay, is this going to work? Where can I get some data so that I can go and share it with a larger retailer and say, this is how this is performing. Did you want to pick up this SKU? When they're doing line resets or category reviews. So, but you can build, look, in coffee, you can build an entire business perpetually out of saying just regional. Not everybody has to be nationwide,
Totally.
right? Just if you want to stay local, then come up with a strategy. How are you going to touch all those independents around? I mean, like for example, in St. Paul, Infra and NCG are both co-op groups of co-ops, right? And they're both headquartered here in St. Paul. So I had the advantage of geography and saying, how do we work with those just here? And then maybe we grow just in natural because the price point's a little bit higher. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I recently worked with a client that jumped in the deep end with a national banner and lost a lot of money because they didn't know how to handle it. So definitely being strategic about how you build that grocery business is really important. So we're at time, and I want to thank you guys all so much for coming. Kevin, this information, excuse me, is mission critical for people who want to be successful and profitable in the grocery market. As I said, if you guys want this tool that Kevin made for you guys, send me a note in my email and I'll send it out to you. Otherwise, it's going to go on sale on the Beverage Business Consulting website. And yeah, thank you so much for joining, and please reach out if you have any other questions.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
You guys are the best. Have a good day. Bye.